It was just after midnight when Sarah Mitchell stared at her phone with trembling hands, her baby's cries filling the small apartment as if the walls themselves could feel the desperation closing in on her. She had counted the money 3 times already, hoping somehow it would change, but it never did. $3. That was all she had left, not enough for the formula her child needed before morning. In that moment, pride gave way to fear, and fear pushed her to do something she had never done before. She dialed a number she barely remembered, one she thought belonged to a local assistance line, hoping someone, anyone, would answer. But the man who picked up that call was not a volunteer, not a social worker, and certainly not someone who usually answered late-night pleas for help. His name was Daniel Reed, a self-made millionaire known for his sharp decisions, his guarded life, and a reputation that suggested he trusted very few people. What began as a simple mistake, a wrong number in the middle of a desperate night, would soon become something neither of them could have prepared for, something that would quietly unfold into a story of risk, doubt, and a connection that neither money nor logic could fully explain. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The line should have gone silent within seconds. That would have been the expected outcome, a brief apology, an awkward disconnect, and 2 lives continuing on separate paths without ever crossing again. But that is not what happened that night. Instead, Daniel Reed stayed on the line, listening, not interrupting, not rushing her off the phone the way most people would when faced with a stranger's problem. Sarah Mitchell hesitated at first, her voice unsteady, almost as if she expected to be dismissed at any moment. And yet something about the silence on the other end felt different. It wasn't cold or impatient. It was deliberate, as though every word she spoke was being carefully weighed. For a man who had built his life on calculated decisions, this moment did not fit any pattern he was known for. It raises a question that doesn't have an easy answer. Why would someone like Daniel Reed, a man with no connection to Sarah, no obligation, no reason to care, choose to stay and listen when it would have been far easier to hang up and forget the call ever happened? And perhaps even more important, what was it in her voice, in her story, that made him pause long enough to consider that this was not just another mistake, not just another wrong number in the middle of the night? Because this wasn't just about money. It reached beyond a simple request for help, beyond a small amount that someone in his position could easily give without a second thought. There was something deeper forming in that moment, something neither of them could see clearly yet, but something that would begin to shape every decision that followed. And as the conversation continued, slowly, cautiously, a sense began to settle in, that this call, as accidental as it seemed, might not have been a mistake at all, but the beginning of something far more personal than either of them was prepared to face. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and long before that phone call, her life had already been shaped by a series of quiet struggles that rarely made themselves visible to the outside world. She lived in a small apartment on the edge of a neighborhood most people passed through without noticing, the kind of place where rent was just affordable enough to keep her from the street, but never stable enough to offer peace of mind. Just a few months earlier, she had been working a steady job, nothing glamorous, but enough to keep food on the table and a roof over her head. Then, without warning, the company downsized, and her position was gone in a matter of minutes, reduced to a handshake and a brief apology that did nothing to prepare her for what came next. With no close family to rely on and no safety net to fall back on, Sarah found herself facing a reality that many people never fully understand until they live it, the slow, exhausting process of trying to stay afloat when everything seems to be slipping at once. She spent her days searching for work, filling out applications, making calls that often went unanswered, and holding on to the hope that something would change before things got worse. But hope does not pay bills, and it does not quiet a hungry child in the middle of the night. As the weeks passed, her savings disappeared, replaced by overdue notices and growing anxiety. Still, she refused to ask for help, not because she didn't need it, but because she had always believed that she should be able to handle things on her own. That belief, once a source of strength, slowly became a burden she carried in silence. There were days when she ate less so her baby could have enough, nights when she stayed awake listening to the soft breathing of her child, wondering how long she could keep going like this. She had skipped meals more times than she could count, convincing herself it was temporary, that things would turn around soon, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. By the time she picked up that phone, it wasn't just about baby formula anymore. It was about reaching a point where the weight of doing everything alone became too much to carry, even for someone as determined as Sarah Mitchell. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number, each digit pressed with hesitation, as if she could still stop herself before it connected, before her situation became something spoken out loud to a stranger. She didn't even know who she was calling, only that the number had been written down weeks earlier, passed along in a conversation she barely remembered, something about help, something about support, and now it was the only option she had left. The phone rang longer than she expected, each second stretching into doubt, making her question whether she should hang up before anyone answered. But then the line clicked, and a calm, steady voice came through. For a brief moment, Sarah Mitchell couldn't speak, her thoughts caught between pride and urgency, until finally, quietly, almost apologetically, she forced the words out, explaining that she might have the wrong number, that she didn't mean to bother him, but her baby hadn't eaten and she didn't know what else to do. On the other end, Daniel Reed listened without interruption, without the impatience she had prepared herself for, and after a short pause that felt far longer than it was, he asked a simple question: how much do you need? It wasn't disbelief that filled the silence after that. It was something closer to uncertainty, because Sarah wasn't used to being taken seriously in moments like this, and she hesitated, unsure if answering honestly would change the tone of the conversation. Daniel continued asking questions, not aggressively, but carefully, as if trying to understand more than just the situation, and despite every instinct telling her to end the call before she was judged or dismissed, she stayed, answering slowly, revealing pieces of her reality she had kept hidden from everyone else. What stood out was not just that he remained on the line, but that he seemed to be listening for something deeper, something beyond the words she was saying. And then, just as she began to believe that the call might end with a simple transfer of money and nothing more, Daniel said something that made her freeze, something that shifted the entire direction of the moment in a way she could not have anticipated. Because instead of sending money, instead of offering the quick solution she expected, he made an offer she never saw coming, an offer that would force her to make a decision that felt just as uncertain as the call itself. He didn't just want to help, he wanted to meet her, and the moment those words settled in, Sarah Mitchell felt a wave of uncertainty she could not ignore. This was not how these situations were supposed to unfold, not in her experience, not in any story she had ever heard. People either helped from a distance or they didn't help at all, but they did not ask to step into your life, especially not someone like Daniel Reed. She pulled the phone slightly away from her ear as if distance might help her think more clearly, questioning whether she had misunderstood him, but his voice remained steady, calm, and direct, repeating the offer without pressure, without urgency, as though he understood the weight of what he was asking. Her mind moved quickly through possibilities, wondering if this was safe, if this was wise, if this was even real, because nothing about it felt familiar. And yet, before she could reach a conclusion, Daniel did something that complicated everything further. He sent the money anyway, enough to cover what she needed immediately, removing the urgency, but not the question. That single act should have been enough. It should have ended the interaction right there. But instead, it made his request even harder to ignore. Was this kindness, or was there something else behind it? Something she couldn't yet see clearly. Days later, after going back and forth with herself more times than she could count, Sarah agreed to meet him, but only in a public place, somewhere she felt she could leave at any moment if something didn't feel right. The cafe was quiet when she arrived, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on a man who looked exactly as composed as his voice had sounded, sitting alone, waiting without impatience. Daniel Reed stood as she approached, not with the confidence of someone trying to impress, but with the controlled presence of someone who had already decided to be there long before she walked in. The first few moments were filled with an awkward silence that neither of them rushed to fill, as if both understood that this meeting carried more weight than a simple introduction. What started as a mistake had now become something neither of them could easily define. As they began to talk, Daniel asked questions, not just about her current situation, but about her past, her decisions, the path that led her here, and while his tone never changed, there was a level of attention in the way he listened that felt unusually focused. To Sarah, it was both reassuring and unsettling at the same time. To anyone looking from the outside, it might have raised a different kind of question. Why was he so invested? Why did a man with his resources and responsibilities choose to spend his time this way? And as the conversation continued, that question only grew stronger, because the more he listened, the more it seemed that his interest was not fleeting, not temporary, but something far more deliberate than either of them was ready to explain. The conversation moved at a steady pace, but there came a moment when something shifted, not in what was being said, but in what was being held back. Daniel Reed had been listening carefully from the beginning, asking questions with purpose, yet offering very little about himself in return, until that silence could no longer hold. He leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged, but his voice carried a weight that had not been there before, and when he finally spoke about his past, it was not in detail, not in a way that invited sympathy, but in a way that revealed just enough to change everything Sarah Mitchell thought she understood about him. Years ago, long before the life he had built, before the success and the distance that came with it, Daniel had lost someone, a woman whose presence had once grounded him in ways he had never fully explained to anyone else. And with that loss came something even more difficult to accept, a child he never got the chance to meet, a future that ended before it had the chance to begin. He did not speak about it with emotion on the surface. There were no dramatic pauses or visible signs of regret, but the absence of those things made his words carry even more weight, because it was clear that this was not something he shared often, if ever. For Sarah, the meaning behind his actions began to take a different shape, one that extended beyond generosity or curiosity, because what she had mistaken for simple help was now revealing itself as something far more personal. In her story, in the circumstances that brought her to that phone call, Daniel had recognized something familiar, not the details, but the feeling of something unfinished, something unresolved that had stayed with him far longer than he had allowed anyone to see. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about redemption, not in a way that could undo the past, but in a way that gave it a different ending. even if only in small, quiet decisions like the one he had made that night. In the weeks that followed, what began as a single moment of unexpected connection slowly turned into something far more structured and deliberate. Daniel Reed did not disappear after that meeting, nor did he reduce his involvement to a one-time gesture. Instead, he made a decision that carried weight beyond convenience, setting up steady support that allowed Sarah Mitchell to regain a sense of stability she had not felt in months. It started with small, practical steps, ensuring she never had to question how she would feed her child again, but it did not stop there. He introduced her to opportunities she had not considered, helping her secure a job that offered both income and dignity, something she had been searching for long before that night. Over time, what he provided was not just financial relief, but a path forward, one that required effort from her, but no longer felt impossible to walk. To anyone observing from the outside, it might have seemed like an extraordinary act of generosity, a rare example of someone using their resources to make a direct impact. But even then, there remained something about Daniel's actions that suggested there was more beneath the surface. Months passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm Sarah could finally rely on, a rhythm that allowed her to think beyond survival and consider the future in a way she had not been able to for a long time. It was during this period, through a conversation she had not expected to have, that she discovered something that changed her understanding of everything that had happened. What she had believed to be a singular event, a moment of chance that brought her into contact with one person willing to help, was not as isolated as she thought. Daniel had done this before, not once, not twice, but quietly, consistently, reaching out to others in situations similar to hers, offering support without recognition, without making it known beyond the people directly involved. This was not the first call, and it would not be the last. The realization did not diminish what he had done for her. If anything, it gave it a different kind of meaning, one that extended beyond personal connection and into something broader, something rooted in a decision he had made long ago about the kind of person he would choose to be moving forward. Sometimes, the people we least expect become the reason we keep going, not because they change everything at once, but because they step in at a moment when giving up feels like the only option left. And as this story comes to a close, it leaves behind a question that does not have a simple answer, one that depends entirely on perspective, experience, and choice. If you were in his position, with every reason to ignore that call and continue with your life, would you have answered, or would you have let it ring until it stopped, never knowing what might have come from a single decision to listen? What makes this story stay with people is not just the outcome, but the quiet decisions that shaped it along the way, decisions that could have easily gone in a different direction if even one moment had changed. Sarah Mitchell often found herself reflecting on that night, not with disbelief, but with a deeper understanding of how close she had come to choosing silence instead of action, to putting the phone down and convincing herself that she would find another way. In her mind, that single choice stood out more than anything that followed, because it marked the point where everything began to shift, not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily enough to change the course of her life. Daniel Reed, on the other hand, did not speak about it in the same way. For him, it was never about recognition or acknowledgement, and he made it clear, even without saying it directly, that what he had done was not something he considered extraordinary. Yet the pattern of his actions suggested otherwise, because helping one person could be explained as coincidence, but helping many, over time, in the same quiet manner, pointed to something far more intentional. As their lives continued on separate but connected paths, there was no dramatic conclusion, no single moment that marked an ending, only a gradual understanding that what had happened between them was part of something larger than either of them had initially seen. Sarah moved forward with a sense of stability she had fought hard to regain, carrying with her the memory of a moment when everything felt uncertain and how quickly that uncertainty had shifted once she chose to reach out. Daniel remained who he had always been on the surface, composed, private, and focused, but beneath that, there was a consistency in his actions that spoke louder than any explanation he could have given. In the end, this was not just a story about a wrong number or a fortunate encounter. It was a reflection of how easily people can pass by opportunities to make a difference without ever realizing it. And perhaps that is what makes it worth remembering. The idea that sometimes the smallest decisions, the ones made in moments of hesitation or doubt, carry the greatest impact, not just for one person, but for many lives that may never even cross paths. What started as a desperate late-night call for baby formula turned into a life-changing connection no one saw coming. When Sarah mistakenly dialed the wrong number, she expected rejection or silence. Instead, she found someone who listened. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories.